Welcome to Unlayered. Today we are talking to Kevin and Tony from Underdog Protocol. And for those who aren't aware, Underdog was the grand prize winner of the Solana Grizzlython back in April. Super cool project, obviously. A lot of people are excited about it. And it's in NFT infra, I guess is like the best way to describe it. It's an API that helps, whether it's businesses, individuals, organizations, deploy NFTs at scale. And we're going to get into the product exactly, how it's different and what new use cases are enabled by it. But I guess the key differentiator is that it emphasizes what people call dynamic NFTs, which are kind of a newer thing in the quote unquote NFT meta. But before we get into all of that stuff, I definitely want this episode to kind of build up to why those are useful, because NFTs have changed so much since the early days, the punk days, so to speak. Why don't we kick it off by just telling us about how you got interested in NFTs, how you got interested in building in dynamic NFTs specifically, but maybe like the backstory for us.
Yeah, a little bit of the backstory on Underdog. And Sal, you covered, I guess, what we do today really well. So I'll leave it at that. And I think Tony and I started more on the consumer side of crypto, looking at like social tokens and badging and rewarding. And one of the things that we noticed in that space is a lot of rebuilding of the wheel, where there are a lot of really important core primitives on Solana, whether that's Metaplex or even the Cardinal Labs and other tools as well. And there wasn't a way to kind of unite and bring together like all these different pieces of technology in like one suite of tools. So as we were kind of rebuilding the wheel constantly with different consumer apps, constantly pivoting, trying to find product market fit, we realized that, hey, we really just need to build this core infrastructure stack for more like product-led experiences in Web3. And that really light bulb moment for us was when we had a conversation with Neil, Cash, and Akshay at Super Team. They're like, hey, we really like what you're building on this like social badging type experience with NFTs. We have this XP reputation system sitting in our Airtable, and we'd love to bring it on chain. And that was like, hey, we need to build an API for what we've built so far, these like gasless transactions accessible through an API where you can easily update these NFTs, make a more dynamic experience. And we need to be able to plug into all these people that have built communities that have existing Web2 tools that they're already using. And we want to be able to plug into that. And I think that's allowed us to take this tech stack that we built for more of a consumer use case and start generalizing it for different applications. Super Team is one of our first partners in that case. Solana Mobile is another big one where we're powering their Genesis token integrated directly into the phone itself. And we've now done things with like Parcel, Solarplex as well, really kind of focusing on tying these NFTs that are more dynamic Web2-like experiences directly into the product or workflow of our customers.
Understood. I think that makes a lot of sense. And perhaps one quick question on that front is, I think a lot of people that might have heard the term NFTs for the first time, they immediately think of the PFPs, and I'm a big fan of PFPs, and we talked a lot about that topic in our last episode. But what you're describing is kind of taking things that have always existed in Web2 apps and even games. You're talking about, ranking systems, experience, kind of even like a loyalty score, if you so have you, and creating, I guess, an NFT that updates based on whether it's a customer or user's like ongoing sort of journey with this organization. Is that kind of like the high level take on the for the consumer side and the business side, what's happening here?
Yeah, I think at a high level, yeah.
Yeah, and what I think one thing to add there is kind of the core principle that I always think about blockchain is, and like Tony and I really share this thought as well, is this kind of idea of bringing social capital on chain. And part of that is also kind of separating this data layer, which is the blockchain, and then the service layer as well. And while we're helping these companies bring their data on chain, that's kind of on an individual basis. And like providing this API makes it a lot easier to use and integrate NFTs into your product. And then the separation allows you to take the Super Team XP and now use it in different areas. And people have kind of thought about that as like the future of blockchain for a while, but it's not easy. Like why we have all these like PFPs and stuff on chain right now, but they're not being actively used as like data sets in other applications where, for example, I would like open my Saga Genesis, and because I have my wallet connected, it knows, every single PFP I'm a part of. Maybe they have their own app. It comes pre-downloaded with all this information. And that's really the idea of Underdog, is like really enabling bringing data on chain. And our long-term thesis is that the most data-rich blockchain is the blockchain that wins.
Am I right with the Saga Genesis token that is it recording your actions on the phone as well? So is it bringing aspects of maybe Web 2 interactions on chain, such as what you're using within the App Store, for example? Is that roughly how it's working?
Roughly, that's how we scoped it out to work. So yeah, like in implementation, I haven't chatted with the Solana mobile team, I think, in the past 2 weeks, but from what we remember, that is how they planned for the Saga Genesis token to work. And ultimately, what that does is create this personalized loyalty and rewards experience that you would imagine is a lot like an Amex or like an airplane reward system, where you're using this application or using your card, for example, and however, based on this usage, you unlock access and perks and rewards. And I think the welcome pack from you minting that Saga Genesis token was step one. But now imagine the world with, after 6 to 12 months of you using this Saga to capture all this activity. Now you have, like Kevin is alluding to, different apps or app recommendations you can download, maybe new apps that you can download, perks and rewards that are there for you to unlock. And I think that's, a lot of what is the future of NFTs. Zed said this on one of your podcasts, which is PFPs probably won't go away because they showed a really simple use case of community building. And I think community building is great. It's like the first step of the funnel, but there's a lot to it there. And that's where I think a lot of the communities have deteriorated, meaning that they did a great job of building community, but they didn't do a good job of sustaining and scaling community. And that's where things like dynamic NFTs come in, which is, hey, I want to identify who my top contributors are and see how I can reward them meritocratically. And using these NFTs as a tool in the growth stack for a community or even a company is something that's super valuable, because now I can see who my top 20 are and use those 20 as as people who can either refer others in or, lead and scale cities out like they do at Super Team. So ultimately, I think the next use cases of NFTs are going to be around this point of engaging individuals, using them as ways to engage users, which is what you're seeing with Solarplex, and then retaining and targeting users. And that's what I think you're seeing with like things like Synapse.fun. And obviously, things like Drip House, where they're obviously retaining a ton of users for creators.
This is where there's some uncertainty, at least in terms of businesses and consumers, as to whether the NFT is the right vehicle to do this. And what I mean by that is, let's use Starbucks, which I know it's a confusing example because they do actually have a loyalty program on chain, but they also have a much bigger and more widely used loyalty program off chain, which is their app with the stars and everything like that. Now, if you're Starbucks, do you really want all of your competitors to know like what your customers are doing if this data is on chain and queryable by anybody? That's the question I ask myself, trying to step into those shoes. Like, how do you think about that?
This is a very interesting question, and something that a lot of our customers have asked us as well. It's like, why would I share a lot of my data on chain? And I think this kind of opens up as like, hey, it's a little bit of a paradigm shift. Like it actually goes back to the question of like, why blockchain in general? Like, why not just store this information in like a shared Google Analytics? And I think that's kind of the challenge that we face, and like working with these customers is like figuring out like, hey, what is that use case for bringing this type of data on chain? And for something like, we've had a conversation with a lot of the one-on-one marketplaces, like there are new use cases that are unlocked by bringing this data on chain. So for example, like with exchange art or collector.sh, with the one-of-ones, right now they only have this like conversion data of like, oh, this piece of art exchange hands. It's very much similar to like if I bought a physical piece of art. And then we've had conversations with them about introducing art provenance. If I view a one-of-one on exchange art or collector.sh, being able to get dropped a compressed NFT as I view that piece of art, which is something that would be uniquely valuable in Web3, because now I have this literal art history on this one-of-one. It's like, who is interested in this piece of art? And it adds value to that one-of-one itself. And for individuals, you're like, hey, I can show off. I was one of the first people that saw like the Mona Lisa back at the Louvre. And I think it's really about thinking like, hey, what are these use cases that Web3 unlocks around shared data? Not necessarily just putting my customers, like that Web 1, Web 2 analog of like taking my customers, putting them on chain, but like, what is that new use case of having this data on chain?
I think, put simply, like the business use case is really every forward-thinking business is thinking about building a product ecosystem, which is where you can offer multiple complementary like products and services, which will keep long-term lifetime value for your customers in your ecosystem high.
Yeah, you almost see this right now, don't you? With certain NFT communities get rewarded by other people who just want the exposure that can come with sort of a vociferous NFT community. And just to put a fine point on what exactly is happening here, but it seems to me that through this API, it's allowing the ability to mesh, if you like, a Web 2 data, so stuff that's maybe happening on a website, with on-chain data. And as Kevin said, that could then maybe create brand new data sets. And I was just wondering, would there be other forms of on-chain data which this could help capture, which wouldn't necessarily be ascribed to the blockchain?
Yeah, so I think the analogy we like to use here is Shopify. If you're in a Shopify store and someone goes on the site, you have this really end-to-end loop of what the user did, like what they searched for, the item that they clicked on, they went to the checkout page and actually make that conversion. You have this very tight loop of conversion. On chain, it's very separated. If I go to Tensor and look at several pieces, NFT collections, and that probably sits in their like Web 2 database or like some Google Analytics. I click on something and then I actually buy it. That's the only piece that's actually captured on chain. So one of the things that Tony and I have been thinking about a lot is on-chain stamps or cookies, essentially using compressed NFTs as marking infrastructure. And I think it kind of moves away from, as Sal mentioned, like NFTs as PFPs, and really thinking of compression and compressed NFTs as more of a transaction with a little bit of metadata attached to it. So kind of this world of where these cookies are now dropped as you go throughout Tensor, and maybe or like Jupyter, I like put these two tokens that I want to swap. I get dropped this compressed NFT, or I visit this page on Tensor and I get dropped a compressed NFT, and then you can start piecing together these parts of the funnel and reward people also not just for now what they own, but also things that they're doing, and bringing kind of these actions on chain as a new data set.
Yeah. It's really, really interesting, isn't it? And you made the point earlier, which I'd like to expand upon a bit more. But you said, I think, that the blockchain which will win will be the one which collects basically the most data. And do you see the future of blockchain similar to maybe how Web 2 has proven itself with Google and Facebook and Twitter? Facebook and Twitter aren't really social media platforms; they're more data platforms. Is that how you're seeing the future of blockchains, and why adding this metadata is going to be so important?
Yeah, and I think this kind of touches a lot on what Sal was saying earlier about like the sell for Web 2 to adopt like Web 3 stuff. And I think right now Web 3 is focused on really shoving Web 3 in their faces with Web 2. And it's like with Nike, Starbucks, a lot of the examples are the same. It's like sell this JPEG for a lot of money. And there's only a very small subset of the population that cares enough or is willing to speculate on random JPEGs. So I think Tony and I think of it as like backward, the other way. Like we need to pull Web 2 into Web 3. All this super valuable data that's sitting in Web 2, it's getting right now sucked up by Googles and Facebooks, and people are giving it away for free. And the reason why the value accrues there is because they have all this very interesting targeting information about a specific user. And if we can start bringing that information on chain, whether it's connecting to working together as a Web3 community, all these startups and products, adding data to the chain through compressed NFTs in a way that people can just understand whether it's a JPEG or some attributes on an NFT, we can start actually having data on chain that's valuable. Right now, it's just who has speculated on monkeys and who has speculated on Mad Lads. But now it's like who's actually doing real valuable things on chain and actually finding value and making purchases on chain that they don't expect it as just an investment, but something that they want to buy. And that is the data that we need to start bringing into Web3.
What I'm trying to understand with respect to NFTs, and I guess maybe some context here is, I watched your guys' presentation, obviously, and I think, one of the things you guys talked about early on in the presentation, and it's something I hear a lot in community, I guess, is whether or not crypto should be so focused on speculation and this idea of, trading NFTs or tokens or what have you. So I think like the simple explanation for that is the reason why people love it for speculation is because literally crypto goes up 10 to 100x more than other assets that people have access to, save for some, random stock or something that might be mooning. What I'm trying to understand though is from a consumer standpoint, an end user standpoint, like how can we either articulate or just think about like the net benefit to them being that 10 to 100x? I think for AI it's obvious, right? Like people can write entire essays in 5 seconds with ChatGPT. With crypto it's so nuanced because we're intersecting with economics, finance, and these primitives we just talked about. How do you guys think about that question?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like what's the real value prop of crypto and NFTs? And I think with AI, you're now able to save time, and you can see that you're saving time because I put in some magic words and magic words come out really organized. And I think you're right with crypto. It's like what is the value prop outside of me seeing something go 10 to 100x? And Vixit and Vibu, we had like some fun conversations. Vibu just kind of like on the side, not directly, but Kevin, maybe you feel free to add on this. I think the big value prop is fun. Like going back to my rant about creators and how they want to carry content over and build these communities around silos. I think that ultimately is just fun, right? You're trying to create fun between a creator and a fan and multiplying that out. I think with Drip, why people love that so much is it's fun to collect these NFTs. Why? Well, because the vision down the line is I'm going to open up an app one day and I'm going to see all of my collectibles and all of the channels that I've had and all of the recommended channels that I have that are related to that. And I'm just going to be able to scroll and collect all that I like. That's fun. And I think a lot of what is happening with Gen Z social is a lot what should be happening with crypto. So there's Mischief. There's like Whatnot, right? Which Mischief is just doing like really cool live retro drops, and it's fun because it's from cool hip brands. Whatnot is like these creators who are live streaming and selling products, or they're even their own products as well. And it's just fun to be able to say like, hey, you get paid out in this credit. You can reuse that credit to invest, and like you turn $5 into some, I don't know, iPhone or iPod, right? Like, that's just fun itself. What's the feeling that happens when you see 10 to 1,000, 10x to 10,000x? You're just having fun. You're elated. And I know it's really stupid to think that way, but the real value prop is fun. And what happens is you Trojan horse everything else into it, right? This idea of ownership, this idea of sovereignty, this idea of governance. And like these are very hard concepts for the mind to even understand now. And technology just makes it even harder. But I think that's why it's such a hard job to build in Web3 or to build in general is, these are technologists and product builders who have to figure out the human mind and then really Trojan horse and pill things like governance, like sovereignty, like ownership into them. And I think Drip House is like probably Drip House and Steppen outside of the tokenomics and all of that. But those are like prime examples of what it really looks like to embed fun and then put inklings of this idea of ownership and all of these other concepts that is Web3 into the product. And Kevin, feel free to expand.
I think there's on the product development side as well, that this fun experience is created by starting to personalize the experience towards things that you care about. So that's why I think there's a really like hand-in-hand relationship between AI and blockchain that I think blockchain has a really huge opportunity to solve for. I think AI is going to have this tendency to converge towards like some element of not necessarily centralization, but I think the winners continuing to be winners. And it goes back to what we were talking about before with who owns the data. And I think ChatGPT, super useful, but every time I have to prompt it with the things that I care about or the things that I've been working on in the past. And that context is what will lead AI companies to win. Like Microsoft's probably going to win in the enterprise space because I already do everything in Microsoft. Well, not me, but every enterprise already does everything in Microsoft. If I'm going to be like, hey, how do I code this, like code up this algorithm? It's already in there somewhere in like my enterprise database. It's going to spit it out. They have the context. They're probably going to win. And I think on the consumer side, we need to build that context. And I think Web3 is the perfect place for that. Instead of all that context sitting in a silo of Google's or Facebook's, Web3 has the opportunity to build that context for AI experience, like generative experiences to build off of that context. And that's how you really make these Web3 experiences fun and interesting, because instead of just having to learn about your customer every single time, opening Artifact, I think that was the name of the app, and like typing in all your preferences, like I like the NBA, I like politics, crypto, it already knows that. Out of the box, it gives me something that I care about. And I think what we're building at Underdog is that marking infrastructure to build context around the users, fully integrated with an indexer that allows you to pull that information and integrate it into your app.
Yeah, and I think Totally had a point about this not too long ago on Twitter, right? Which is like Drip, Dialect, Backpack, Otter should share like a single on-chain social graph to accelerate everyone's growth, right? And I think ultimately that's what should be happening is like we should be creating these experiences together and sharing this data. We don't have to know everything about what's going on in that other person's business, but things that are similar, like Drip and Solarplex, have NFT holders. So there's probably a common metric around there. What can we bring on chain that then drives us forward and enables us to create these interesting experiences or interesting targeting experiments? And I think a lot of builders now are thinking about how do we create the on-chain social graph and what is needed for that. And interestingly enough, like we're seeing a lot of people build on-chain with on-chain cookies using compressed NFTs, kind of alluding to what Kevin is talking about. So we have 2-3 like projects currently building this out as well, which I think is something that's going to be really interesting. You can also see a world where you see these on-chain compressed stamps within X NFTs. So now instead of us relying on these like apps and platforms to embed them, you can embed them within X NFTs, and you have this entire ecosystem of shared data living on Backpack as well, or through Backpack rather.
Theoretically, crypto primitives like NFTs can enhance, let's call them, algorithms, recommender systems, what have you, because now if you're a new user, because you have some on-chain provenance with other protocols you interacted with through this dynamic NFT or any other on-chain activities, you already know enough about them that you can kind of cater the product to their tastes and preferences on day one. And then it just accelerates because now the graph you have access to is basically anything that's on-chain versus only things that they've done in that platform. So I think that makes sense on the surface. I think the challenging part for me to reconcile mentally is, let's take like TikTok, for example, because that's one of the most popular apps in the world. Within like 5 seconds, they'll just quickly figure out what you like because they effectively just study like what you spend screen time on with the first videos, and they'll just kind of shotgun a bunch of stuff at you. And probably within 2 hours, they're like 80% there in terms of what you like, and it only gets better over time. Now, the only way to do that, I could be wrong, but like from what I understand, it doesn't seem like that's possible to decentralize without someone knowing your browsing history or viewing history. Because like those are like the most important inputs, and this applies to YouTube as well. It's not necessarily who you subscribe to. It's just like what you click on and what you watch and for how long. So like that's where I feel like this idea space of decentralized social graphs, I feel like there's just something there that is not going to be that 10 to 100x benefit or increase over Web 2, precisely because I don't know how they can achieve that level of granularity with the data on chain.
I think that I agree with parts of that as well, and I think right now the level of the data is just too shallow. I think what you've purchased on chain, and then but there's kind of like a buildup that we have where we need to start just adding more data that is kind of action type data, or like where you are in an app that starts building towards that. And one of the things that Tony and I have talked a ton about is the ZK stuff with like Elusive and adding a ZK and Light protocol, adding a ZK layer for more of this like specific data that you can start capturing and like in a more private manner, I think will unlock a lot of these like very hyper targeted or personalized experiences. But like you said, there is still kind of this like 2-hour lag, right, between when they can learn about you. And I think there's also this like manual input that like Artifact is having problems with, like getting people to convert, and being able to do that immediately, like from day one, I think is going to be that like 10x or 100x improvement, where apps can actually be competitive on day one with a lot of context about their users.
Because do you think it's the fact that on chain you get this composability aspect, and it's almost like how open source projects inevitably tend to overtake the closed source ones? Do you think that might be a factor, that if you just bring all of this data together, suddenly you can create far richer experiences?
I think that's one piece. You guys are familiar with Notion and Coda by any chance?
Yep.
Like the workplace management. One of the biggest theses, so I'd interviewed with Coda and got pretty deep into their process for head of partnerships. And one of the big things that they told me is the big thesis that we're being invested on is that we're destroying silos across workplaces and companies, meaning that the information that's used within companies is now in some decentralized place on the Notion gallery, the Coda gallery. And now everyone can go and pick all of this information. Now, I think that's exactly where we should be, and how I think we think about this data is, hey, like there's a ton of valuable information that everyone is using. How do we put this in a decentralized way, put this somewhere where people can pick and grab? And ultimately, I think that's the step in the right direction. And Kevin, I don't know if you want to maybe expand on.
That hits on it perfectly. And I think having this separation of the data and the service layer creates a really hyper-competitive service layer, where on day one, you can compete with anyone else because you have access to all this customer information. And I think soon, like in Web3, we're testing out these like mass airdrops as like a MailChimp alternative, and being able to target wallet addresses based on things that they've done on chain and be able to poach customers. I think customer acquisition is going to become a lot easier because you can target the right users that might care about your product. And without that data sitting on chain and without like that data to build on top of, it's a lot harder as a service to compete.
Yeah, it feels like in Web 2, often they take your data just to sell you stuff, ram that down your throat. And to be fair, I think Web 3 probably it does need to look at those sort of revenue models a bit more, because no one really does advertising, and and that's what makes the whole of Web 2 work. So I can definitely see that this sort of thing could bring advertising into Web 3. But the other thing it does seem to unlock, as you say, is maybe the ability to receive, purely because of the crypto rails, I suppose, the ability to actually receive benefits from associated brands and whatnot, but not necessarily brands that you're dealing with, shopping with, interacting with. And maybe that's sort of the value add for the individual, that just as we're all in crypto and we all look out for airdrops and things like that, it could be a sort of airdrop on a mainstream stage.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there are two points there. Like, one is that idea that advertising is evil. And I think that's a very like Web 2 mindset right now. But so much of what we do is powered by advertising. And Netflix, Hulu, they make more money on their advertising tier than their subscription tier. So there's a lot of value that we're getting for free because of ads. So I think in Web 3, like having that fear of introducing advertising into the ecosystem is going to be a big mistake, because there is a lot of opportunity in introducing it, and it won't look like advertising in Web 2 eventually. Yeah, like Dave mentioned, it might be just value just being dropped directly to the customer because that data is now out there, instead of most of that value accruing to the Googles and Facebooks of the world.
And is this idea with crypto that it sort of allows the ability to actually receive as well, which on Web 2 rails, you can't really do that. They'd have to get all your information, whereas here, if they know your wallet address, then bam, that you can receive something. So it does open up that new line of marketing.
It's being able to create that personalized experience. And I think a lot of people love Apple because it's one of those things that just works. Where I open my MacBook and have these windows open, and then I open my iPad and it has all the stuff there already. And I think crypto is, if we can get to that point where like this database, it just works, where I'm using this application, these sets of applications on like a Jupyter or a Radium, and then I'm on Magic Eden, and then I open my Saga Genesis, it comes pre-installed with all those as native apps on that phone. And it's an experience that just works, then consumers at the end of the day don't really care if it's decentralized or not. They just want an experience that just works. And that's why Apple wins. And I think Web3 needs to create an experience like that for it to win on the consumer side.
One thing we just talked about is this idea of making, I guess, product experiences that are kind of similar to like what Apple offers its users, where it's out of the box, ready to go, easy to use. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think where I get hung up sometimes is, on the one hand, if we have all these crypto protocols that are kind of interoperable and open source, from the developer standpoint, what is the incentive now for me? How do I win, basically? Like, what is the incentive if the barriers are so low and anyone can touch the same data and aggregate it and create models based on it? Then how do I prevent another kind of upstart from then taking my user base? Whereas kind of like to your example, Apple has been notorious for the exact opposite, where literally nothing is compatible with their products unless they make it or they sign off on it.
I think we're like a world where smaller apps will win. And I've talked about this with Tony, is like that crypto apps or exits will probably be smaller than what you're used to seeing in Web 2, where it's like $1 billion exit or like some massive acquisition like an Activision and Microsoft. And I think Web 3 is going to tend towards smaller apps. And it's this same trend that I think you'll see, we are seeing with ChatGPT, where it's really easy to build small apps and small apps that generate revenue. And I think there's going to be more of that in like crypto, this like merging of like crypto and Web3, where these small apps that can target users and win, not because they have like a moat or something, it's just because their product is better. And then they have a lot of true fans. Going back to that creator economy, is like being able to connect directly with an audience that cares. And then again, here the crypto comes in, where I can now directly monetize off of this audience. So it's not going to be another $1 billion business probably that's being built or on crypto, but really these like hyper targeted product experiences that succeed in the crypto world.
I think your incentive as a developer is to build a better product, right? Like you're seeing, this is just the question of what's happening with AI currently. And like it's possible that happens with crypto as well. Your incentive should be to build a better product and have a distribution arm. And that's why I think candidly, the whole movement has been to think about distribution first and then think about product second. Communities and the most successful and the biggest businesses in the world will have their own distribution arms. And that's because they'll be able to acquire, nurture, engage, and retain these users. And ultimately, as a developer, or even as a developer as part of the project, that should be your job as well, as helping and contributing to that distribution arm. But I do think that regardless of the experiences that Apple has put forward, regardless of the experiences that Meta has put forward, what you're seeing is that ecosystems work when providing value for users and collecting data that then creates personalized experiences, or experiences across those ecosystems. And I think totally hinted at this as well, which is you've only ever seen ecosystems and shared social graphs work at Meta, and it's because all of the products are under their hood. And I think that there is a possibility to do that with 3 to 5 products within crypto. And once you start to do that, then we can start figuring out these questions that I think builders in AI are also starting to figure out now. But the first step is to hop out of speculative trading and then go into that world.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And it sort of highlights how Web3 is really this paradigm shift potentially, because obviously the old world way of thinking with social graphs is you just get these behemoths, but I don't think anyone thinks that that's a particularly good idea. And who wins in that case? It's the VCs, and who loses? It's the users. And so if you're in this new paradigm where it's highly competitive, much lower moats, much lower barriers to entry, then suddenly it's the users who are the ones who are winning. And unfortunately for them, the VCs are the ones who might struggle. So yeah, and it's similar to what Lens is doing as well, isn't it? They're creating this this open data platform effectively, and just saying build on top of it, and may the best protocol win.
Yeah, and I think the ZK stuff is going to be important, and that's when it's going to really come into play, and it's going to make a lot of this. What data can I bring on chain, and why do I want to share that? But I do think users ultimately are looking for these experiences, and there's not another technology that enables for that to happen than crypto and blockchain. But since it is such a paradigm shift versus the value prop that we talked about with AIs, I save 20 minutes on writing. It's very hard to get that across. And I have a ton of respect for Lens as well, because they've built like a data protocol or social protocol for the last year and a half, and people are using it. And when we're able to build more things of that nature, like with Drip at Solana, I think it's going to be really exciting with a lot of this data. And who knows, tie it with some vector database, like a dynamic NFT and a vector database, and start having fun and generating interfaces, right? Like we chatted with Brave Wallet about this. Thinking about how do you integrate compression into the wallet, capture all of this activity across the wallet, and then feed it into a large language model or into a vector database and start generating custom interfaces for individuals across Brave Wallet. Right, like that is the future of surfing the internet. That is the future of being digitally native. And I think it does take AI, learnings from AI and learnings from Web3 and crypto to get there for users.
It's just funny because, Lens and Farcaster, they're kind of like the poster childs for decentralized social graph protocols. They've been building for over a year now. They have, I think, tens of thousands of users, and you watch Threads get 100 million in like 2 days, and pretty much the entire crypto on-chain people too, in addition to a bunch of other regular people.
Yeah. That is super funny. It's like the Threads crypto presence is bigger than Web3, like Web3 social's crypto presence.
Yeah, there's a lesson to be learned from that, in that people like curation and they don't want to visit a ton of destinations. If you think about YouTube, for instance, maybe less than 1% of people who use YouTube create videos, and like the other 99 point whatever percent are watching them. That's why they go on YouTube, is because Mr. Beast spends $5 million a video or whatever that number is, because he thinks he can hit 150 million views or 200 million or 300 million. That is the number one thing that drives them, and it creates this great flywheel where the content is just off the charts fantastic, and the number of eyeballs you can access is really high. And so I think this industry needs to think more about, if we want to kind of decentralize quote unquote YouTube, like how do you topple that? There does not seem like a very straightforward path, going from an app that has 1 billion plus DAUs to a crypto native one.
I'd push back though. I think the curation point is an amazing point, and I'd spent maybe a year and a half or a year building a curation platform specifically, and I think all that curation is just context, right? So what you're doing is adding context to content, and in turn building that content up into something new. So what I mean by that is, like, I'm curating a set of playlists. All of these have an individual meaning, but when they're put together, they're a completely new art. Right. And I think that context is where the on-chain stamps and the on-chain cookies really come into play. Is no crypto app will be valuable, no crypto social app will be valuable until there's valuable on-chain data or there's valuable actions from users on-chain. And generally, I think in order to get there, we need to have this data first. And that's where I think implementing these on-chain cookies becomes super important. And on the curation piece, right? Like, I think you're completely right. Is individuals just want curated experiences, and they could care less about anything else. Which is something that I think Web3 is also a great piece for, is like these curation platforms, or I think it was a very early 2021 play. It was curation and music curation and art curation. I'm still curious to see what other types of curation we can get into in Web3.
Yeah, and on the toppling side of things, I think we're not here to. It goes back to the startup aphorism: is like Venice wasn't destroyed; they just built around it. And I think Web3 is building around the data silos of Google and Facebook, and not trying to topple it directly. And I think it goes back to what Tony was saying. It's not going to be possible to build around it until we have something valuable, like some data that's actually valuable on chain.
I would love to actually pivot into, because you brought up on-chain cookies a few times. Talk to us about what that is and how it works exactly, and what types of data we would expect to be enabled by that.
Totally. Yeah. So the idea of on-chain cookies is we're using compression as a way to bring data on-chain. And so the idea is there's really important parts of the customer journey that you want to be marked on-chain. The examples that we've seen are Wallet Connect, are listing an NFT, viewing an NFT, viewing art, swapping, trading, contributing to a pool. Those are actions that live within a database or live on chain, but can also be associated like a receipt or have a marker. And so the idea is we just drop compressed NFTs across all of those points. So the progress that we have done on it is, like I mentioned, we have two teams working on this. One of the teams is specifically focused on like Backpack. So Backpack should be releasing their mobile app soon. We have like XNFTs being built with these compressed cookies built into them. And then second is Kirill. Kirill is building like a Harry Potter type game for on-chain cookies. So every time you interact with these actions on-chain, you'll be dropped compressed NFTs and you'll earn points for them. And then these houses will have points and rewards. But the idea is we want to drop compressed NFTs for important actions across the customer journey as markers, a lot like you'd have markers within your own database. And Kevin, if I missed anything, feel free to expand on it.
No, yeah, I think you hit it all. It's really this idea of bringing Web 2 actions into Web 3, really bringing that Web 2 into Web 3.
I love this usage of the compressed NFT tech on Solana, because at the moment, I think what Drip is doing is great. And I think that 100%, there's a lot of utility there, and it's going to build this massive social graph. And really, it's showcasing that NFTs probably should be free by and large, and that's how they're going to expand. But ultimately, when you've got a collection of 350,000 profile pictures, it's not going to be able to sustain like any real floor price, and a lot of the utility of NFTs is the speculative side. So it feels to me that this technology is far more useful in what you're proposing, which is actually to build up this data set and this online social graph. Really, is that how you're viewing it? And also, is this only possible on Solana? And if the blockchain that's going to win is the one with the most data, how does that put Solana in that race?
Yeah, definitely. It puts Solana into that race, and I think pulling, like with compressed NFTs, the first thing that we thought to do with compressed NFTs is mass airdrops. Basically, take what we already did with normal NFTs and just add a couple zeros to them. And because the number of zeros for costs, like everyone says it's 100x, 1000x improvement in cost. How Tony and I think about it is 1000x improvement in the amount of data that you can capture on chain. And why compressed NFTs or not other like sorts of compressed state, since it is just a general Solana like primitive account compression. I think with NFTs are just are like a human readable data on chain, and I think bringing that human readable data where it shows up in your wallet as a little like receipt, or it shows up like on chain as like data that I can use in another application. That's why like NFTs are valuable, because everyone has kind of accepted it as like the way to transfer data in Web3, whether that's a PFP or potentially like messages or these like cookie markers in the future.
What's on the table is Solana's tech enables us to have scalable and consumer-friendly experiences, right? And I think that in itself, that table stakes is amazing, but that doesn't mean anything unless there's a real use case outside of community building, speculative trading. So I think in the world that we live in, is being able to bring this Web2 data and being able to add context to a lot of the transactions and actions that already happen makes what's at table stakes plus apps and experiences, apps, not infra, that can be built on Solana with this data, gives it the chance at being, the premier blockchain and really just the place to build in the world. And I think second is, I think what's interesting with like Neon and like Eclipse is there's Cosmos is really at the center of a lot of what we're doing in crypto, actually, which is really surprising for me. And I think that there's a world where a lot of what's happening on Ethereum will want to port over onto Solana. And I think the real value add there, and the real value add, I said this before in the last podcast, for companies coming onto crypto is the digitally native consumer. And in the world where we have table stakes, plus we have a lot of this data, what happens is it makes it really easy to go to market for projects going from Ethereum to Solana, or brands wanting to come on from Web 2 onto Solana. And candidly, that's why Polygon is ahead of us, is they have a lot of this data, already on their chain. And so for Starbucks, it's really easy for me to go, hey, like Polygon just makes sense. This is where a lot of my digitally native consumers are. And so for us, table stakes plus this data is a no-brainer, right? Like things like TipLink, things like Underdog just don't exist. Not to shill us, but they just don't exist on Ethereum, right? And then I think you combine like a TipLink, which is just a link in a wallet, and you combine some sort of dynamic NFT that evolves every time you visit a boba guys, and then you can burn it and maybe get some perks and rewards. And it's just like you signed up for a Square, like the Square reward system and the POS. Like those are that's what you really want to be. So TLDR is table stakes plus data to build experiences, plus the data to go to market for teams that want to pour order from Ethereum and other blockchains, and companies that want to come into Web3 and to Solana. And that's ultimately our bet and why we think these NFTs are the way forward.
And that's actually a great overview of kind of like that thesis underpinning Underdog. That's kind of the reason why you guys won, obviously, the grand prize at Grizzlython. And yeah, I think it's makes sense, compared to Polygon, like in my opinion, inferior tech, and they were able to make all these inroads with these, legacy brands. Just imagine you kind of take that scalability of Solana, putting your product on top of it, making these APIs really easy to use, and allowing anyone, whether it's a company or a startup, to deploy these on-chain experiences. I think that makes a ton of sense. Want to actually dig into that a bit and talk to me about how Underdog is architected. Like, is it a different like NFT standard? How are you guys making this gas free? How does it work under the hood?
Yeah, so we want to be as compatible as possible with the ecosystem. So we don't use any like new standards or anything. So we use the Bubblegum program. We use the Metaplex token metadata program as well, and kind of wrap it in our own custom program that just leverages, of course, like this like very functional program style nature of Solana. And why we wrap it is that we have this like organization, like project level structure that allows teams to work together on these NFT projects and collections that make it really easy to mint a ton of compressed NFTs. We handle all the Merkle trees in the background for you. And then these are like Merkle trees that are, to dive a little bit more into the technical details, like composable with the ecosystem, with Canopy, with like reasonable depth. As well. So all these things that you don't have to worry about as a developer. It's just an API call to create an NFT, an API call to retrieve the data around that NFT. So what we end up providing for developers is really this like fully integrated like indexer of all your NFTs, a minter for the NFTs that you're creating, and then a way to update them, the metadata on those NFTs as well.
Amazing. Yeah, I remember you guys in the presentation kind of had that, I guess, meme of the iPhone where it's, we're doing all three of these things in one API, which is great. And I think it's a great way to kind of pitch it to potential customers. Kind of a sidebars. I think this is kind of a weird relic of Solana, but it seems like we all have to basically abide by Metaplex. Like, what do you guys think of that paradigm we have in comparison to like Ethereum, which seems to be a bit more open?
I think there are pros and cons of that. And one of the cons on the Ethereum side is if I want to deploy like some NFT collection, I need to actually like build my own smart contract, copy and paste it from somewhere, and actually deploy it on chain. So it makes it a lot harder to just get started. So that's why there's a lot more services, I think, similar to Underdog that do kind of that contract development and then deployment for you, and then like expose it via an API. I think Solana is a lot more interesting in like being this like very like functional nature where I can just layer programs on top of each other and CPI into each of these programs. And I think that eventually, I think there's like a huge advantage of speed where if I'm working with NFTs, I don't need to know any Rust or like even deploy or touch a smart contract at all. I can just use like the token metadata program because it already exists there, and that's allowed us to really accelerate our growth as well, where we can build off of these primitives that Metaplex and Solana Foundation have worked so hard to build, and kind of take that and build an easier, like kind of like Versal almost for compressed NFTs and NFTs in general, where they're building on the primitives of AWS. I think one of the unfortunate things about the Metaplex thing is kind of just like fighting over something that already was, I guess, solved in the past. And I'm not going to like, I think that both sides have merit where like Metaplex, of course, is a business as well. And of course, on the other side is like people want to create or NFTs, and like the higher the fees are, the higher the friction, the less innovation that you can create on that end. So there's a little bit of, I think, a challenge there. But I think this is something that we've already solved and accepted. And it's unfortunate that Solana was built like almost like hard coded on the programs. But these are things that we can't be fighting about internally. We need to focus, like that's not going to drive adoption or like longer term crypto adoption. We need to focus on like the product and like what actually unique experiences Web3 can build.
I think this is a topic that will only get more and more relevant as we kind of skate into this next bull market, hopefully sooner rather than later, with respect to these, really high issuance NFTs, dynamic NFTs, and hopefully more kind of enterprises dipping their toe, so to speak, into Web3 with things like Underdog Protocol. Paint us a picture, guys, of how you kind of see this next bull run shaking out for NFTs specifically, and what kind of use cases you're envisioning.
I don't like to think about it as a bull run or a bear run. I think of making something that's actually valuable. And when you put everything in the context of a bull or bear run, it's just around speculation. And that doesn't create products. That just creates people that want to flip JPEGs or tokens. And the sooner that blockchain and Web3 can move away from that mindset, I think the sooner that we can actually build a product that people care about, or it's actually like useful for a consumer and not just an investor or speculator.
What gets me excited is targeting and segmenting using NFTs. So I think with this context, we don't need much. I think we need 5 apps. 5 apps using compressed NFTs as cookies, sharing some sort of data, whether that's wallet connects, whether that's total volume traded, whether that's listed NFTs, whether that's whatever the case may be. We can figure that out at another point. And then using compressed NFT, using that data as compressed cookies, running lists, segmenting them, and then being able to reach out to them using compressed NFTs, a lot like you can with MailChimp, set up these campaigns. I think that's the main use case that I'm really excited about, because it uses compressed cookies and it uses compressed NFTs. But at a higher level, what gets me excited about it is you see now NFTs as a tool in your growth stack, right? Like it's a lot just like a CRM in your tool for running your business. And I think that's where the next valuable product will be headed, is using NFTs to understand customers and then engage with them. And that's what gets me really excited. So namely, I think compressed cookies is number one, but Synapse.fun is number 2. And like Ujwal, who's a part of Super Team, is a 17-year-old dev who just is crushing it constantly. And what he does is he runs reports for your project. He gives you like a 15-page report on what other communities people live, what are the top apps that they use, what are their top holdings, what actions do they do within them, how engaged are they, and then he gives you recommendations on what to do with all of that information. And that's the future, because like I said a long time ago, right? We did a great job of community building, but we didn't do a great job of engaging the community and growing the community. And I still think a lot of projects are figuring out how to reacquire, re-engage, or even engage existing users. So that's what gets me the most excited.
Amazing. It gets me excited too. That's a great way to kind of conclude and summarize a lot of the things we talked about. Tony and Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts and what you're building at Underdog Protocol. Best of luck on that journey. I'm sure you guys are going to crush it.
Yeah, appreciate it, Solid.
Guys, thank you.